education and keeping up to date is just, I think, the most important thing you can do, because even if, you're facing headwinds and you're trying to get things, you're telling people, well, we have to do this to be compliant, and no one's listening to you, at least you know which way to push the sales and which way to get everybody moving, right?
Welcome to the Joy-Powered Workspace podcast, where we help HR and business leaders embrace joy in the workplace. I'm Susan White, owner of Susan Tinder White Consulting, an HR consulting practice. Joining me is my co-host and dear friend, JoDee Curtis, owner of Purple Ink and powered by Purple Ink, a professional network that I'm a member of. Today's episode is focused on employment law for 2023. The topic is actually a selection from our listeners. We do periodically a listener's choice survey, and we heard back from many of you, and we had actually two winners, this one and a training Q&A. Thanks to all of you who voted. Please be on the lookout for future listener surveys. Now, neither JoDee or I are lawyers, so we thought it made sense to invite someone here to help keep all of us and you up to date on some of the employment law happenings. Our guest today is Gina Carrillo, who you may remember. We're inviting her back as her first episode with us back in June of 2021, which was entitled You and the EEOC, was very popular. Back then, Gina was a trial attorney with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Since then, she's founded her own firm, Carrillo Law LLC, which is based in Phoenix, Arizona. She's also had another son since our last podcast conversation, named Leo. Gina, you've been really busy. Gina, welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. I continue to listen to you guys all the time and love learning from you and listen to you pretty much every single episode. So thank you for having me again, as not just a past person, but as a fan.
Oh, thank you so much. Please start us off with maybe telling us a little bit about upcoming legislation that you think may affect HR or employees.
Absolutely. Well, I know that, some of your listeners will be well adept. I think actually today is the day that the pregnancy workers, or the day of taping, I guess, but the
Yes.
Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act and PUMP are going into...
They're going to go into effect. Tell us a little bit about those, if you don't mind, maybe the highlights of those two.
Absolutely. So for many years, and during my time at the EEOC, we worked a lot on trying to make ADA laws, Americans with Disabilities Act, apply to pregnant workers. Oftentimes when women are pregnant, they have limitations on what they can do, sometimes lifting restrictions, all the way up to bed rest and everything in between. But the Title VII didn't really cover all that. And because it was a temporary condition because of pregnancy, the ADA didn't always really cover everything. So luckily, we're in a position now where Congress passed, and it's been put into effect, legislation that makes it a law to accommodate women who are not only when they're pregnant affected by certain conditions, but also post-pregnancy, hence the PUMP Act, to make sure that women have abilities and breaks and everything they need to be able to do what they need to at work post childbirth.
Well, I say hooray. Long overdue.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing, really, that we've gone so long without that.
Absolutely incredible, that we had the Pregnancy Discrimination Act put in effect in the early 90s, and it took us almost 30 years to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not just discriminating against them for being pregnant, but also literally everything else that comes with it.
Right,
Yes.
right. Interesting.
There's also other things that have been coming down the pipeline too. It's maybe not in the legislation process yet, but I'm sure everyone's seen memos coming from the NLRB, DOL, really going after severance agreements, in particular non-compete clauses, non-solicitation clauses, things that are really restrictive, not just put into place for high-level executives, but for lower-level employees, and restricting what, if anything, they're able to do after their employment ends with their current employer. And I think that's something that, given the current state and, lots of layoffs and rifts, is something to be highly aware of when many companies are sending out lots of severance agreements.
Yes, right. I think that's really past due too. So I'm very glad about that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then on a state level, we're seeing a rise in things like paid sick leave. For example, I'm in Arizona. Arizona has a paid sick leave state, but that is starting to go to other states as well, requiring employers of pretty much any size to provide their employees with paid sick leave and not retaliating against them for using that leave. And there's also a movement in some states such as California, Colorado, to have paid time off, which also goes hand in hand with the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act to require not just the FMLA protections that we know so well of unpaid leave, but requiring smaller employers and also paid leave for people who are on extended leaves of absence. There's also been a lot of movements for things like discrimination in hairstyles. I know in Illinois, they have had just passed recently the Crown Act, which says you can't discriminate against somebody for wearing their hairstyle naturally. And I know, and I think there'll be a lot more pushback on this, but I know in California, there's been a lot of movement towards completely banning background checks, which is kind of surprising. I'll be interested to see where that legislation goes and what happens with it.
Yeah, that I had not even heard of. So that's very interesting.
And Gina, obviously we've had so many changes in state laws in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, maybe, that has just made all of this so complicated. Especially, I mean, even Purple Ink, we only have 15 employees, and yet we have 2 people who work in different states, right? Which is just making it very complicated for companies. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends a lot on the size of your company, but it is something I think there's a lot of value and benefits to be gained from remote work. You can really get any number of talent from around the country, but it's something, like you said, you really have to take into consideration what those laws in those states are going to do and how they're going to affect you, because it's not where your company is, it's where your employees are, as we know. Depending on the size, the more national size companies, usually the advice I give is maybe not apply the strictest laws from all over the country, because that can be overwhelming and a big change for a company, but maybe divide up by regions, like, the Northeast, what are the most restrictive laws there? Southeast, what are, and kind of choosing and picking and choosing where you're going to draw those lines in order to make not only cost-effective ways of doing it, but manageable. It's just, like you said, extremely overwhelming, not only how much there is, but how fast it's happening.
Yeah, it's crazy. Gina, how can our listeners help their organizations embrace laws that are changing, even when they would prefer not to change?
Not just not prefer to change, but probably a bit of a feeling of, we just did this, now it's changing to that, right? It's hard to keep up with. It's always something new articles coming out. But I think first and foremost is maybe trying to understand the policy behind this change, the public policy. Why are local lawmakers putting this to effect? We have a history, I think, in this country of being fair and equitable towards smaller businesses. So if they're putting a restriction on smaller businesses, what's the theory behind this? Why are we trying to protect a certain class of employees? And maybe understanding and empathizing with that fact would help push that moment forward, especially like, for example, again, maybe somebody who's a man in the workplace understanding, like, yes, it can be burdensome, not unduly burdensome, but burdensome to make these accommodations for your pregnant employee, but thinking about why those are in effect and our history and why that's going forward is a reason to maybe help with to embrace those laws. I think another way to do that is to think about just general morale. And I think that goes hand in hand with policy. But while this might be more cost effective to your business, obviously, I'm a true believer in the happier your employees are, the more money you're going to make and save in the long run. You're going to want to stick around. They're going to want to be with you, and they're going to be loyal to you. And I think that's a really, really good way to think about embracing these changes. It can be hard and expensive in the immediate future, but in the long run, you might even see as somebody at the forefront of this stuff and why it's so important. If that just doesn't work and you're not as swayed by emotions and empathy as I might be, looking at the bottom line, right? We're talking about a cost up front, but if you sit down with either your HR person, your in-house counsel, or whoever, and say, okay, what is this lawsuit going to cost me if I don't comply with this new law, or what are the fines in actuality, and how are they going to affect me? In addition to, if it's a new law, states are going to be looking to enforce it against people, right? It's clearly at the top of their mind. What is that bad press going to do for your business and your bottom line? You don't want to be the one that somebody's making an example of. So if it's not empathy, maybe just looking at the cold, hard dollars and trying to figure out why this might be good for your business.
I think those are all good suggestions. Goodness.
Yeah.
So, Gina, are there any differences in your mind between small versus big company compliance? And if so, what might those differences be?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of differences to it, right? We're not just looking at multiple states where an employer might just be in one, two, all of them, right? But we're also looking at the different number of employees. Like FMLA, there's 50 plus employees, you might have 10, right? So you're looking at not just which laws apply to you in your state, but then further, which laws apply to you based on the number of employees you have. But again, to use as an example, the Arizona sick leave law, if you have less than 15 employees, a different standard applies, whereas more than 50 or more than 15, another standard applies. So it might vary within the law. So you have to really think about, there's all these different laws to be in compliance with, and it varies a lot based on your size and who you're with. I think, again, talking about the bottom line, as a lawyer, I'm never going to tell you not to follow the law or do anything like that. But if you're looking at it and the cost of implementing something is way greater than your fines, that might affect your compliance as well. What can you afford, and what you think is going to be important for you in the long run financially? Depending on what your resources are, you just have to prioritize what you're going to do. So you can't always do everything, but I think there are more things that are, like newer laws. I think those are going to be much higher on the priority list. Lower laws, maybe with lower fines, might be a little bit lower. That would be the best way. Yeah.
I think that's good advice to triage. I mean, you want to do everything right. We always do, but you're a risk mitigator. And I think that your, approach makes good business sense.
So, Gina, we had this topic today really came to us from our listeners as one of the areas that they wanted to hear more about on our podcast. And so we had different variations of a couple of questions that we're combining. But the first one is, what are the best resources or maybe compliance tools that HR professionals and business leaders might use to keep up with all of these different changing laws, company size, what states they're in? Any advice for them on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can just share really what I do, which is I make it a habit. I spend about 5 to 10 minutes a day making sure to read the headlines, because if it's made national headlines, it's definitely a big deal, right? But then going to our more HR specific sources, and even the bigger law firms like Littler and Ogletree, or also going to SHRM and things like that, seeing what their big headlines are, right? What are they talking about? What are the hot button issues? And if they're saying that something is a new law that's going into effect, that's for sure something I'm going to be spending my time reading that day. It's just continual curiosity and self-education, I think, is important beyond our own continuing education requirements, right?
Right. Great advice.
Any particular journals out there that you read, or any associations that you, other than SHRM, which I think is great, that you stay on top of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know one of the big ones I honestly just do is the Department of Labor and EEOC newsrooms. They put out not only just what their new guidance is, what they are basically pushing for the law to be, right? What we know from their guidelines, they're saying this is the way we interpret it, AKA this is the way we intend to enforce it, right? And
yes.
Hopefully the courts are going to pick it up. So reading their newsroom is not only saying what kind of cases they're bringing, but where they're headed and where their head's really at, right? There's also some smaller companies other than SHRM that I use, at least. There's the Business Management Daily. They have newsletters every day on various topics. They do employment law ones, or they give advice on, like how to be just a leader in the HR space. It's a really good resource that I've liked using, and it's good to read every day. There's also ones I know lots of people out there read the Morning Brew. They also have the Substack, the HR Brew, which I not only like reading their newsletter, but they also have a good LinkedIn group that they update very regularly. So I tend to follow that and see what everybody else there is talking about and what their concerns are, right? It's not just what's affecting your company, but maybe other like-minded companies and things like that. And then, of course, the biggest source of what you can do is usually, in my opinion, is doing your internal and external audits of everything that's going on, right? As you've read the stuff, the things you're, you know what the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act generally is going to require of you. You don't have to be a legal expert to have an idea that, well, they're going to have these basic requirements, right? So looking back at some of your policies and saying, well, is that compliant with this? Is this something that we're going to be able to do? And whether you are able to do that internally or have to do it externally is up to you. But,
that's great advice, really.
And you mentioned the Department of Labor newsroom. Can I just Google Department of Labor newsroom and it'll pop up for me?
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things about these organizations is or these agencies is that they keep their, like the EEOC one and the DOL one, they keep it up on their website, they keep it updated, they put basically all their press releases up there, because they're a government agency, they keep it pretty well organized and you can see everything that's going on, not just in your region, nationally, things like that, but even just Googling things like NLRB or DOL, hitting that news section of Google really can just give you a good idea too of everything that's going on and staying apprised of it.
Yeah.
And it hits my price point, which is free. So I love free resources. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's so good. So Gina, what other advice might you have for HR professionals and business leaders regarding employment law? And I know that you can't really give advice because we're not asking for any legal advice, but just tips that you have.
Yeah, I think, I think I might have even said it the last time I was here, but just the education and keeping up to date is just, I think, the most important thing you can do. Because even if, you're facing headwinds and you're trying to get things, you're telling people, well, we have to do this to be compliant and no one's listening to you, at least you know which way to push the sales and which way to get everybody moving, right? How to be a leader in that sense is to just know what's going on and what's important in the world and what is most out there, but keeping your head up too, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's not really the legal perspective of it, but with such federal legislation as the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act and going all the way down to the city of Chicago stuff, the Crown Act, they have requirements for sexual harassment training and things like that. It's really important to just stay apprised of that on an employment law perspective. So that way, when you're talking to in-house counsel or you're having complaints come in or you're looking at your policies, you know what to be looking for.
Right. Mm-hmm. Great advice. Gina, our joy-powered question today is, what brings you joy in your work?
I hate to sound like an absolute broken record here, but since I guess to just take a step back on it, I left the EEOC about a year ago. And when I was there, my heavy duty focus was federal employment discrimination laws, not so much the state level, but really this federal narrow issue. And in the past year, learning about everything that has gone on, not just on my state level, like I'm in Arizona, learning everything about Arizona employment law here, but learning about it in other states through my work in consulting with other businesses and talking to them because they obviously have employees in other states, just constantly learning about this ever-growing landscape. I think we're in a just a very exciting time for being in this space, and there's just so much changing to learn and grow, and that brings me lots of joy. So learning.
Good for you.
And you know what? I'm just grateful there's people in the world with changing employment laws. It brings them joy. So yay. Right. Yay for Gina. And yay for everybody who needs to find Gina. And with that, it's a nice segue. Gina, how do people find you? If someone's interested in engaging you for assistance, I know that your contact information has changed now that you're not with the EEOC.
Yes, you can find me on my website. I can spell it out if you want.
That would be great. Please do.
So my law firm is Carrillo Law PLLC, and that's the website. So it's www.carrillolaw CarrillowPLLC.com. And on there you can find my contact information. My email is just Gina@CarrillowPLLC.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, just searching for me. So I'm around. Please reach out.
Beautiful. And we'll put that in our show notes too. So if you're listening to this and you didn't have a pen with you, please go back and look at our show notes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Gina. And we hope you have a joy-powered day.
Thank you so much for having me again.
It was fun. Thank you.
Susan, we have a listener question today that is, what suggestions do you have for people feeling stuck? How can I gain more HR exposure if my manager isn't willing to train me or give me other work to make you a more well-rounded professional?
That can be so frustrating when you're hungry to learn and grow and you just may not be in the right environment or with the right boss. So, some ideas I have would be, first of all, can you find a mentor? Maybe somebody else in the HR profession outside of your company who you might meet through a SHRM event or through some other civic or community event, and ask that person if you couldn't maybe do some conversations with them, if they'd be willing to be sort of a mentor for you. I think also being really active in your local HR organizations, whether it's SHRM or some other organization, go and meet other HR people, see what they're talking about, see what's hot on their worry list. You certainly could go back to school to get a degree in HR if you don't have one, or a master's in HR. I think you get a chance there just to really learn some of the real core competencies needed in the profession. And so it's certainly an avenue. You're going to meet a lot of other people doing what you're doing, and you may get some good ideas. And then, JoDee, I know you and I are big fans of becoming SHRM certified or HRCI certified, which really helps you continue your own personal journey of learning and gives you some credentials if you decide that maybe this environment's not the one you want to stay in. And then you don't even have to go after degrees or certifications. There's classes that you can take in HR on LinkedIn Learning. I'm sure at your local universities, and specialty credentials that you might want to think about acquiring. How about you, JoDee? Any other ideas?
Yes, I love all of those suggestions, and I think those are terrific. But I also would take you back to say, are there things you specifically ask your boss about that they've actually turned you down, or are you waiting for them to give you those opportunities? Sometimes it's just, hey, I really would like to learn more about benefits or something else, and ask for that specifically and directly, as opposed to making the assumption that he isn't willing to train or give you other work.
Yeah, sometimes we feel like we're getting that vibe. They're not interested, and maybe we haven't been direct enough with them. So, listener, good luck. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
About how it goes. It's time for In the News, an AARP.org blog in February 2023 by Natalie Misakian entitled AARP Thanks EEOC for Stepping Up Anti-Age Bias Enforcement, highlighted the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's stepped up efforts to protect older workers. Their focus is the growing use of technology in recruiting and hiring, which the AARP believes could be leaving older workers behind. The concern is that AI algorithms may intentionally or unintentionally eliminate older workers from consideration. The AARP found that 80% of people over the age of 50 have seen or experienced some form of age discrimination in the last 2 years, but only 3% of them contacted the EEOC to file a charge, because what they tell you is they're just not sure it's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Boy, that 80% is a huge number.
Oh my gosh, I know. JoDee, do you agree that it isn't really very hard to find clues on resumes or in applications that may indicate a person's age?
Oh, totally. Yeah. so many people just put their graduation date on there. Now, it does assume that you graduated when you were 22, right? And if you went
Sure.
back to school and graduated later, they wouldn't really know, or they put their first job on there, or
Yeah, that was
and
40
they're-
years ago. Yeah.
right. There's
Mhm.
lots of clues.
So if we can figure it out, no surprise that sophisticated AI can do even better at trying to ferret out the age of an individual. An expression that I used to hear voiced a lot when discussing candidates for hire or promotion was, how long of a runway do you think they have?
Yeah.
I got it. Oh my gosh. When you think about it, that is just on the face of it discriminatory, right? Because you're trying to figure out how old are they? Do you think they're worth investing in? Once I hit my 50s, I can remember many times someone much younger than me in corporate America asking questions like, Susan, how much longer do you want to work? Have you thought about when you want to retire? Oh my gosh. I probably didn't take offense then, but now that I think about it, maybe they were sending me a message.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
is funny too to think of that question with you because you did retire, but you're
I
still
did.
working, right? So
Right,
you're just
right.
doing something differently. So,
No, very true. Now, JoDee, recognizing that you're much younger than I am, do you ever hear it or see it in how people relate to you or how clients talk about candidates or talent? Do you ever pick up on any of these vibes?
yes. And certainly, Purple Ink does a lot of recruiting. So we'll get questions from candidates. Do you think my age is going to,
Mm.
influence my ability to find something? We have clients that say, we're looking for someone young and high
Oh,
energy and new to this. And I do think it has gotten the age discrimination, at least from my perspective, appears to have gotten better. When
mm,
through COVID and even after COVID, as many companies are struggling to hire people, they all of a sudden have a new view on older people and what they might bring to the organization. So,
glad to hear that.
yeah,
I think people are in much better shape today. They're living much longer. They want
right.
to be actively employed or they need to be actively employed. I hope that older workers are feeling more comfortable and confident to work as long as they want to.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I just wanted to say too about those resume clues. I'm not certainly not suggesting that they try and hide information, but there's no reason, for
Mm,
example, to put your college graduation date out there or to include a job you had 25 years ago either. So
good
you don't have
advice.
to bring it up to it.
Right, right. No, I think that's very fair and good advice. Thank you.
So thanks for listening today and make it a joy powered day.
If you would like SHRM recertification credit for listening to this podcast, please visit getjoypowered.com/SHRM. You'll find an evaluation of the podcast, and once you complete the evaluation, you will see the SHRM recertification credit code and a link to a proof of participation certificate. Again, that's getjoypowered.com/SHRM. Thank you for listening, and thanks for your dedication to the HR profession. Thank you for listening. If you liked the show, please tell your friends about it and let us know what you think by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts.
You can learn more about Joy Powered at getjoypowered.com. Check out the Joy Powered shop, where you can order our books, journals, and other items that power our joy at getjoypowered.com/shop. We're at Joy Powered on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can email us at joypowered@gmail.com.
We hope you tune in next time. Make it a joy-powered day.